Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This channel is an educational channel, and we look at theories of everything and go in depth so that you can see how to apply these things to your own life, help you with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, and your formation of a holistic worldview. Today is our 527th video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory, which was originated by Dewey B. Larson back in 1959 when he articulated his two fundamental postulates about how he believed the universe operated. And then for the next 30 years, the last 30 years of his life, he wrote many books that reflected his theoretical universe. So he derived a theoretical universe from his fundamental postulates, what his universe would look like if his postulates were correct, and then compared his theoretical universe with the so-called empirical universe of modern science that they have measured in their laboratories and compiled in their scientific tables. And Larson wrote books on chemistry, astronomy, atomic physics. And then he also has a book on metaphysics that includes psychology, religion, philosophy, some biology, and we've gone through all those works to a certain extent. Not so much the astronomy stuff yet, but a little bit. And Larson also wrote two books on economics. And we're looking at one of those two books today that is called The Road to Permanent Prosperity. And Larson is one of the few scientists who attempted to construct his universe not based on matter and not based on energy, but based on motion. And for Larson, that was a kind of motion that he called scalar motion, a motion that has a magnitude but has no specific direction, which you can envision using a balloon. You blow up the balloon, you put dots on the balloon. Blow up the balloon, all the dots are moving away from each other. But they're not moving in any specific direction. It's either in or out. All the dots are moving away from all the other dots. Every dot is moving in every direction. And so too, if you contract the balloon, all the dots will be moving toward each other. Those are the two basic motions in Larson's universe. That outward motion he calls the progression. That inward motion he calls gravitation. And the reason why we call it the reciprocal system of theory is that for Larson, motion was the relationship between space and time. And space and time have a reciprocal relationship, meaning that all of our scientific entities, not just speed and acceleration, but also matter and energy and force and pressure and electric charge and permeability and magnetic field intensity and so on are all fractions with time or space as the numerator and space or time as the denominator, with the caveat that space and time can have multiple dimensions. So in Larson's system, matter is time to the third power over space to the third power, whereas speed is just space over time. The bicycle is moving 20 miles per hour, 20 miles of space in 1 hour of time. And you can see the reciprocal relationship if you decide to, double the speed. Now the bicycle is moving 40 miles per hour, 40 miles of space in 1 hour of time. Or, equivalently, you can also say now the bicycle is moving 20 miles per half hour, 20 miles of space in 1/2 hour of time. You can either double the speed, double the space, or halve the time. That is a reciprocal relationship. Now, we've covered so many different works of Larson's to kind of show how he's able to take those that reciprocal system of theory and apply it, on a broad to very diverse topics. And so that's why we're one of the reasons why we are plugging it in here to economics, see how he plugs it in to economics. I think it's be interesting to also learn, the principles of fundamental prosperity macroeconomically, in case, the current or future administrations are interested in these things, maybe fixing the economy. Larson has some suggestions for that, but also to see how the reciprocal system in general works by seeing how it works in diverse particular fields. Now, if you'd like to get a more detailed rundown of how the reciprocal system operates, you probably want to look at one of my earlier videos where I go into it in a little bit more detail. Probably one of my first 474 of those videos explains it in more detail. For the purposes of this video, I'm pretty much going to assume that you have some background, or that you're, ready to go into the unknown a little bit and be comfortable with that. Larson will probably explain what you need to know in this video as I read through chapter 4, which is where we're at. And so also, if you want to start from the beginning, you want to go back about 4 or 5 days to get to the beginning of this book. But chapter 4 here is called Value. And it goes like this. When the fullback carrying the ball through the opponent's line is finally stopped and the referee's whistle blows, it is often impossible for the onlooker to determine at the moment just what has happened, whether there has been a gain or a loss, whether the offensive side still has the ball or has lost it on a fumble. All that one can see is a confused jumble of players with an arm sticking out of the pile here and a leg protruding there. We cannot tell which, if any, of the players that we see actually have a grasp on the ball and which are merely part of the pile. But the referee moves in and one by one picks out those who are mere trimmings until he finally gets down to the essential participants in the play and is able to determine just where matters stand. To the casual observer, and to many of the professionals in the field as well, the economic scene presents a very similar appearance of confusion. All that we can see on the surface is a tangle of finance, markets, corporations, labor unions, foreign trade, money, transportation, credit, wages, profits, and so on, almost without end. So, in order to get a starting point from which to begin an analysis, we need to adopt the tactics of the football referee and clear away the non-essentials and collateral matters one by one until we get down to the fundamental economic processes. When we do this and examine each item from the standpoint of whether or not the business of making a living, the primary objective of all economic activity, could be carried on without it, we find that none of the terms that were mentioned is actually essential. In fact, there are only two things that are indispensable features of economic life: production and consumption. So I'm thinking, and I may be wrong, but I'm thinking that production and consumption are going to take the place of time and space here in Larson's reciprocal system analysis. That could be wrong, but maybe we can forward that as a hypothesis and see how it works out. In the dawn era of human existence on Earth, life had not progressed beyond these fundamentals. The prehistoric people gathered their food by their own unaided efforts and took shelter wherever they could find it. Long before the beginning of recorded history, however, they had discovered that by devoting part of their efforts to the making of tools, they could multiply the effectiveness of their direct labor manyfold. Thus, the simple economic life took a step toward becoming more complicated. As time went on, the hunter who had met with exceptional success and had more meat than he could use found that his excess could be traded for the surplus fruit or vegetables in the possessions of others, to the advantage of all concerned. Barter thus joined the growing list of economic processes. At some point, it was recognized that Willie Dogtooth had an exceptional skill in making arrowheads, and it dawned upon the hunter that there was a substantial gain to be made by trading meat to Willie for the necessary arrowheads and devoting his own time to hunting, a vocation at which he excelled, rather than continuing to make his own clumsy and inferior weapons. Willie was consequently relieved of the necessity to forage for food and was able to concentrate on his own specialty, the making of arrowheads. Here we have the beginning of specialization of effort, another milestone along the way to a more complex economic life. All down through the ages, this process continued. As man's general knowledge broadened, more and more new devices were invented to facilitate the task of making a living and to enable enjoyment of a greater variety of comforts and conveniences with the expenditure of less and less effort. But all of this increase in complexity merely added external accessories to the machine. It did not alter the basic purpose of economic activity, and it did not alter the fundamental fact that all of this activity is built around the complementary functions of production and consumption. The end toward which the economic action is directed is consumption, and the prerequisite for consumption is production. Thus, the important functional division in economics is not between labor and capital, or between government and industry, or between rich and poor, but between producer and consumer. This distinction is largely academic in the first stage of economic development, where each economic unit, individual, family, or tribe consumes its own products. But just as soon as the second major stage comes into being with the introduction of barter, all products of effort take on a dual aspect. To the consumers, the individuals who expect to receive the benefits of these products or goods, as we will call them, they are articles to be consumed and enjoyed. But to the producers, they have an entirely different significance. From the producer's viewpoint, they are not goods, articles of consumption, but a means whereby such goods can be obtained. In other words, they constitute purchasing power. So we have goods and purchasing power as the kind of the articles of consumption and production. A favorite device of the early economists was the Robinson-Crusoe approach to economic problems, in which the points at issue were first examined from the standpoint of an isolated individual, and the conclusions drawn from this analysis were then extrapolated to the more complex economic situations. This approach has gone out of fashion and is less frequently encountered in current practice, partly because it seems somewhat incongruous in the sophisticated setting of present-day economic theory, but also because there has been great difficulty in reconciling the conclusions drawn from examination of the Crusoe economy with modern economic theories. While this might logically be interpreted as an indication that there is something wrong with the theories, most economists have preferred to question the legitimacy of the extrapolation. Nevertheless, it can hardly be denied that there is a distinct advantage in studying the simpler situation first, particularly in setting up the basic framework of theory. Frank Knight was emphatic on this point. Quote, "The concept of a Crusoe economy seems to me almost indispensable," he said. "I do not see how we can talk sense about economics without considering the economic behavior of an isolated individual," end quote. One of the important advantages of studying simple forms as stepping stones to an understanding of their more complex successors is that many truths that are obscured by a mass of detail in the complex structure are self-evident in the simple situation. It is clear that unless some additional factor has been introduced during the process of development, the relations that are found to exist under the less complicated conditions will still continue to hold good in the more highly developed organization. And this gives us a good working hypothesis concerning the operation of the complex mechanism. On subjecting this hypothesis to the usual scientific tests to determine its validity, we will sometimes find that a new element actually has been introduced, altering the original relations. More often, however, these relations are just as valid as ever, but have been so confused and covered up by a profusion of collateral issues that they are difficult to recognize without the help of the clue obtained from a consideration of the simpler situation. The creation of purchasing power is a good example. It is commonly taken for granted in present-day economic discussions that the production of goods and the creation of purchasing power with which to buy those goods are two separate and distinct things. Indeed, some of the debate over the national economic policies revolves around the question as to how to best go about providing the consumers with more purchasing power so that they can absorb the potential output of our factories. But when we turn to the primitive second stage economic organization, where barter is the most advanced economic process, it is obvious that production of goods, including discovery, which is a form of production, is the only method of creating purchasing power. Production of goods is the only method of creating purchasing power. When we analyze the status of purchasing power in the present-day economy, we find that the basic situation is still the same as it was in the days of barter. There is still no other way of creating purchasing power. We may gain access to purchasing power produced by others through gift, theft, or borrowing, and some devices have been invented that provide purchasing power for certain individuals at the expense of others by what amounts to borrowing by governmental agencies or by the economic community. Such devices as money inflation and revaluation of existing assets. These devices do not create anything. They merely redistribute what has been produced. The limitation on creation of purchasing power is an important feature of economic life. In recognizing it, we are already in direct conflict with contemporary economic thought. Paul Samuelson tells us categorically, quote, "In social sciences, there is no law like that of the conservation of energy to prevent the creation of purchasing power," end quote. Earlier, Frank Knight said essentially the same thing, quote, "There is nothing in economics corresponding to momentum or energy or their conservation principles in mechanics," end quote. But these authors are definitely wrong. There is an economic quantity, purchasing power, that corresponds to energy, and there is a law that prevents the creation of purchasing power in any other manner than by production. Many of the shortcomings of modern economics are due to the failure of economists to recognize the existence of this limitation and to their persistent advocacy of measures and policies that are doomed from their inception because they are in conflict with this principle. So here he's saying that purchasing power corresponds to energy. Energy in Larson's system is time over space. As I was discussing earlier with all of our scientific entities have their time-space fractions or space-time fractions. Energy is time over space. Momentum is time to the second power, or space to the second power over time to the second power. Momentum is like two-dimensional speed. Don't quote me on that, actually. Momentum, I don't know if momentum, I believe that's correct. I'm going to have to check on that. Momentum could be two-dimensional energy. because internal momentum is two-dimensional energy. So anyway, I'll check into that. Back to the economic stuff. There are many physical quantities which, under ordinary circumstances, do not change in magnitude, even though they may undergo radical changes in form. Such quantities are said to be conserved, and the expressions of this conservation, the laws of conservation of mass, energy, momentum, electric charge, etc., are some of the most valuable tools of scientific analysis. These laws are not absolute prohibitions. Mass may be transformed into energy, for instance. For general application, they must therefore be stated in terms that provide for transformations under special circumstances. However, they are applicable under a wide enough range of conditions to make them very useful. They are all local manifestations of what we may call the universal conservation law, a far-reaching physical principle that prohibits getting something out of nothing. For some reason, this universal law has never been recognized, or at least never generally accepted in economics. Indeed, the extent to which economic theory and practice follow policies based on hopes and expectations of getting something for nothing is simply astounding. Time and again, in the pages that follow, it will be necessary to point out that the result which is anticipated by the proponents of a particular economic action, or by the adherents of a theory that purports to explain the consequences of such an action, is nothing more than an expectation of getting something for nothing. Furthermore, it will be shown that some of the principal defects that present-day economists profess to see in the performance of the prevailing economic system are simply the automatic reactions of the mechanisms to these something-for-nothing attempts. It just reminds me of Sun Ra, the jazz band leader, and he would say, nothing turned itself inside out and became something. So, the universe had to come out of something, or out of nothing. So there is a something for nothing that comes with the creation of the universe. Maybe it's not a principle that applies within a universe, but the universe had to come from nothing. Anyway, oddly enough, in view of the wide differences of opinion that divide the various schools of economic thought, this defiance or disregard of one of the most basic laws of the universe is one thing on which the great majority of economists are united. Some actually do profess to recognize the conservation law and jocularly express it in the form, quote, "there is no free lunch." But even in the wildest of the ideas and proposals for getting something for nothing have the support of economists of the front rank, while many of those whose true character is somewhat more obscure are part and parcel of the orthodox economic doctrine of the present era. A very substantial proportion of the vast stream of books and articles offering prescriptions for our economic ills that is now pouring forth from our publishing outlets could very appropriately be titled, "How to Get Something for Nothing." This dream of something for nothing is one of the oldest and most persistent illusions of the human race. The physical fields have had their share of these fantasies. Perpetual motion machines were all the rage at one time, and even today there is no lack of schemes which purport to develop energy out of nothing. But where there is steady progress towards general agreement on basic principles, as there is in the physical sciences, the climate is unfavorable for ideas of this kind, and in our times they rarely get any support from professional scientists or engineers. As a scientific product, this present work must take a firm stand against all such proposals, and against all theoretical ideas that lend support to them, regardless of whether they emanate, as many of them do, from impractical visionaries who draw them out of thin air, or whether they come from some presumably legitimate source and are backed by economic authorities all the way from Adam Smith to John Maynard Keynes. Since purchasing power is something real that cannot be created out of nothing, it likewise cannot be dissolved back into nothing. That is, it is conserved. Like other conserved quantities, it has a high degree of permanence. It cannot simply disappear. It must remain intact until it participates in a process whereby it is transformed into something else. Okay, it looks like the next paragraph is quite long, so I think we're going to stop right there. Yeah, I would just say, you know, the something for nothing, that is basically, I think Larson is pointing at religion there. That's an element of religion, is the something for nothing, the miracle of the creation of the universe and of any type of miracle that might occur in the universe would be some kind of something for nothing kind of approach. Now, Larson, in his cosmology, he says that he has no information about how the universe came into being. So he just punts or defers the creation. He basically says, I have no explanation for the creation. I start my explanation after that, you know. So the creation is already has already taken place, and so now I'm going to start my analysis. So he has no explanation for the creation, so he leaves that out of his analysis entirely. And you know, I'm not saying that that's justified or not, but that is how he does it.